Happy Sunday! Mike from Hound Dog Media here, and it's time for another episode of Con to Couch. With so many conventions delayed or canceled this year, we're bringing the best guests and coolest hangouts of that experience right to you in the comfort of your own home. Today, we're bringing you the fourth installment of Flint Dille's limited series, celebrating the upcoming release of his new book, The Gamesmaster, Almost Famous in the Geek 80s. It's available for pre-order on Amazon and other major booksellers, or you can go to Rarebird Publishing in the show links and pre-order an autographed copy today. Today, we welcome back Paul Dini, Buzz Dixon, and Doug Booth, but we've also got a first-timer on the show. He's an accomplished screenwriter and the man behind the scripts for such classic films as Robocop and Starship Troopers. Without further ado, please welcome Ed Neumeier, our special guest co-host, along with Flint Dille.
Hello.
Hey, all right. So Ed, we'll start out with you. Sometimes what we do is you have people like point around things in their office and sort of introduce themselves that way when you have all the cool stuff, but you do not have to do that. But the point is, Ed's got a Ed had the ultimate screenwriter dream date. He went out, wrote a script, it got made, and it became a classic. I mean, that's a rare thing to have happen. So yeah, start out talking about that and how I mean, I know how you got the idea for RoboCop, but it's a really interesting story.
What, you want me to talk about how I got the idea for RoboCop?
Yeah. Let's start.
Well,
there.
I can do. Let me see if I can do this. I mean, I think I got the idea like most people get the idea for something. I actually remember the moment the name and the concept sort of gelled it was on the set of another movie, because I had an office on the Warner Brothers lot, and they were making a movie. This giant science fiction movie suddenly grew up around me, and it was Blade Runner. So this was 1981, and I used to go there at night when my day job was over. I was a story analyst at Columbia Pictures, and I would go. There were so many people on the set, you could kind of pretend like you were working on the set, and they would give you things to do. So I worked on the art department for a little while, and I was thinking about some other ideas. I knew I needed to write a screenplay, and somehow that set and this idea about what a robot was. I remember someone pointed at the actor Sean Young, who was walking by, and said, that's a robot. And my reaction at that time was, no, that's not a robot. But what kind of robot would I like to see on this street? And about 4 a.m, the third night in, suddenly the title Robocop came into my head. And I almost had a startling image of Robocop standing on that street next to that blue car they called the Spinner. Anyway, I think it goes to the power of location, which has actually always been powerful in my creative process. I don't know. I think we're talking about that a little bit today. But I like to go places and feel things. And sometimes I think that's a great spur to imagination. And that's what happened on Robocop.
Well, that's a really interesting thing. I mean, obviously the big clunker in that story is real people aren't standing around on the set of Blade Runner at 4 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, I mean, because you were already well ensconced in the industry at that point. Right?
Yeah, I'd already been working in the business for 5 or 6 years as a reader. I was a reader and a development guy, and ever so briefly, a development executive at MCA back in the days when it was in the Black Tower. That was not. I was kind of an interloper, and that wasn't really for me. And I decided I had to admit that I wanted to be a writer and get out of that life. So I did.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember when I was working for Roger Corman, I remember nearly electrocuting myself with a wet dry vacuum, because it was raining, and thinking, I think I want to be a writer. I don't want to do any of this outdoor stuff anymore.
So you worked for Corman too. I worked around all the people I knew, including the producer.
Ed Rodman wrote the script of the thing I was working on.
Right, and Ed Rodman was the production executive at Orion on RoboCop, and John Davison was a Roger Corman guy. He had been so I knew all the people who had been trained under Corman, and later I actually worked on Frankenstein Unbound. I did an uncredited rewrite of that for Roger Corman, so I got my Roger Corman stripes in barely.
Yeah, well, that's kind of a funny. Yeah, you did neither Buzz nor Paul. You just didn't work for Corman ever, did you?
No.
Well, you worked for Lou Scheimer, which was kind of the same thing, but for animation.
Yeah, he was sort of the Roger Corman of Saturday morning.
They are not totally dissimilar characters. That's the funny thing about it.
Well, there were
Do what you
fewer
can to get
topless.
the
There were
show
fewer
made.
topless actresses at Filmation Studios.
I tell a story in the book about Sybil Danning had a cold. and you know what Sybil Danning is? Yeah, you know, just Google her image if you'll know exactly who it is. She was the Valkyrie in That'll Be on the Stars. And I was PA, so it was like, she said, I want some Sudafed, but she kind of had an accent. And for some reason, I had never heard of Sudafed. I thought it was some weird, rare Swedish cold medicine. You know, I knew about Contact and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So we got in the car, and she's in full Valkyrie outfit, which was quite an outfit. And I had a book called All Night LA, because remember, this is like 1980, right?
Yeah.
You know, I'm driving around with my All Night LA book to every store I could find. I remember walking into a 7-Eleven, and she's with her, and she's in her costume, and these guys are playing video games. They leave back from the video games, and you hear like they immediately lose. It's great. There's no part of me that thought I was gonna get through that night alive, but I did. Anyway, so all right, so you write the script, and then what happens? How do you go from finishing the script to you're in production?
You're talking to me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it actually the next part of the story, I wrote a spec script with my partner Michael Miner, and then we both gave it to some people we knew. I gave it to John Davison, I actually gave it to a director named Jonathan Kaplan, who I knew, another Corman grad, and I gave it to Kaplan in hopes that he would give it to a guy he worked with and knew from Kaplan, John Davison, the producer of the movie Airplane. And that's what happened. He actually John Kaplan read it and said, oh, John Davison would like to read something like this. And I called John Davison and said, how would you like me to get you the script? And will you send a messenger? I remember, because this was the 80s, messengers were really big in then. And John Davison, who never spent more than a nickel on anything, said, a messenger? Are you kidding? I'll meet you in the parking lot at Vaughn's or something like that. So we met on the corner of Laurel Canyon and Ventura, whatever market that is, in the parking lot, and I gave him the script, and that was my big break in Hollywood.
And what? So he buys it, or he takes?
Yeah, he bought. He had a deal at Orion, where your friend Ann Rodman and Francis Dole were also working with Barbara Boyle, who had also come from Corman, and they were all working for Metaboy there. And Davis had a pretty good deal there, and he bought the script, or they offered him the script. We started writing immediately on a second draft, and the second draft turned out okay, actually. And then we got into the business of shopping for a director. A long period of 6 months, it seemed forever, where we could never get a director who a lot of people wanted to do it, but they weren't available. We had various directors involved. They couldn't do it. Jim McBride was going to do it. He couldn't do it. All these people came and went. Some bad directors, I won't mention, came and went. And then Barbara Boyle gave it to Paul Verhoeven. And Paul Verhoeven opened the script that said, Robocop, the future of law enforcement. And he purportedly threw it over his shoulder at the nearest trash can and did not read it. But he said he did. And then after no response, Barbara Boyle called him and asked him to read it again for subtext. And so he had his wife, Martine, read it. And Martine read it, and she got to the page where it said they blew Murphy's hand off and shot him to pieces. And she said, I think you're going to like this. And he read it to that point and booked the ticket, is how the story goes. I'm sure he actually read the whole thing. But that was the scene that got him, the crucifixion of Officer Murphy. And suddenly we were talking about doing a draft for Paul. But that would have been in 1986. And we did a draft for Paul, a serious draft for Paul. Paul didn't think it should be funny. So I had to take out all the jokes, everything I liked about it, and write a really serious script. And it was very difficult to write. And in the middle of it, my writing partner, Michael Miner, broke his leg skiing. And he was even more cranky after that. So it was just no fun at all to write this bad draft for Paul. And I couldn't really. Michael had abandoned me, and I was like sleeping in the office at Culver Studios, trying to finish it practically. And Paul came in, and I had 98 pages. It hadn't quite been finished, and he sat and read it in front of me. And I'll tell you, he still does the same thing to this day, and it's my least favorite thing in the world. But he did it. He just read the whole thing in front of me, and he said, "Well, I was wrong. We are going back to your original script." And we went back to the second draft with the jokes in it. And he had kind of decided. Interestingly, when I met him the first time, I gave him a bunch of comic books. And I said, "This is kind of what we're doing." And he looked at me like there was something wrong with me. But he took them, but he went and read them. And little did I know, among many things about Mr. Verhoeven, was as a boy, he really liked comic books. He liked adventure comic books. And so as soon as he tapped into to Robocop, the script, as not a real idea, but as a comic book idea, I think he changed his mind about it. And then we more or less shot the second draft with lots of revisions and changes and little things to it. But the second draft became the script, the template for the movie. And it went, now I think, relatively quickly. Then it seemed to take forever, and we were back and forth and up and down, and they canceled us a couple times, and everyone was going home. And, and then it somehow righted itself, and we made the movie. A very difficult experience for everybody involved. Phil Tippett, the legendary VFX supervisor, often says he and his wife were once hit by a car in an intersection, put them in the hospital, nearly killed her, and he always said that RoboCop was a little like that. So I guess it was bad. I don't remember. It's a long time ago now, and I've forgotten a lot of it. But it was a difficult movie, and then it was a kind of a surprise success, which after a difficult movie and a surprise success is almost as hard to take. It's like you don't know what to do with it. But that's about the time I met you, Flint. We were at a party at Lisa Henson's house.
That's
right.
right.
The first time I met you, and it was that summer, right after RoboCop had come out. I think, or was it at Stan Lee's? No, it was at Stan Lee's.
Yeah, no, it's
invited to Stan Lee's
house, but I think we had met before that. Taplin's house was the first time we were talking.
That's true. We had met at various places, but at Taplin's house some years later. Yes, that's true.
It's really funny. All right, so Paul. All right, so a similar thing. Okay, how did you guys get to? And we will talk about Batman today. We're saying we talk about Batman later, but let's talk about it now. How did you get to the take on Batman that you did? The kind of I mean, I know at some point it starts out with Fleischer, but I mean, that. How'd you get there?
Well, Warner Brothers wanted to develop a Batman cartoon to follow along with the Tim Burton movies. And there was really a resurgence in animation in the early 90s because there was more animation showing up in syndication. Disney was getting involved in daily animation programming. Warner Brothers felt they should be there as well. They had a lot of interest in working, going back a ways, working with Steven Spielberg on Tiny Toon Adventures. You were involved in the initial stages of Tiny Toons, Flint, and Looney Tunes. I was
involved with when it was a movie, and then Steven broke it to me that we're not going to make this movie. Where I have to do it as a television show, but I have another movie for you. That was that meeting.
So they were looking around for various properties they could develop as from the Warner's archives and their library of properties, and they put everything on the table. They were looking at shows for spin-off shows for the Looney Tune characters, and they were looking at Gremlins. They were looking at the Griswolds from National Lampoon Family Vacation. Just sort of anything that they could spin off. And then DC was a very interesting subject for them, and there were a lot of things to iron out with their early relationships with DC Comics. But Batman seemed to be a given because the movie had been so popular, and then they were coming out with Batman Returns, so they were going to slot us right there, right before, right around the time of Batman Returns. And in developing it, everybody was pretty much of one mind that we wanted to do a more serious take on Batman because we had seen cartoons growing up, like the Filmation cartoons, which were produced under the rules of Saturday morning television at the time. So Batman could not, he had to be more like the Adam West character and not like the comic books which were being revitalized at that time by Denny O'Neil, who we have to props to today. He passed away last week. Great writer who really took Batman from the camp era and stripped him down and made him put him back to his roots and made him the Dark Knight detective, and set the stage for Frank Miller and for everything that came after that. And still a hell of a writer, writing Batman or Batman-related stories right up until the end. His last story just appeared this last week in the Joker 80th anniversary anthology. And terrific guy, very knowledgeable, very passionate about the characters. I didn't work a lot with him, but I did, had a fairly open lines of communication with him early on when we were developing the Batman animated series. He was our point person at DC. Him and the other group editors who worked with him on Batman, and he's very supportive. He wrote a few episodes. He did the Ra's al Ghul episodes, where he was a character that Denny had created, this sort of leader of a shadow organization.
The daughter back too.
What? Yeah, Talia, and he really added quite a lot to the Batman mythos. He reinvented the Joker and Two-Face, and he created Man-Bat and Ra's al Ghul and Talia, and just added a tremendous amount to the Batman lore. So we were blessed by having him early on as our point of contact with DC to approve things or make suggestions. And we wanted it to be reflective of the comic books, because in sitting down with everybody who worked on the show initially, which was Bruce Timm and Eric Radomski and Mitch Bryan, and even people around the office like Gene McCurdy and Tom Ruger, they all loved the Tim Burton movie, but they also loved the other things that went into Batman around that time, like The Dark Knight and like the current trend in the Batman comics. And we realized if this is really going to work, we need to take what's best about Batman, the recent versions, and even with a nod toward the 60s version, because that was fun. We all grew up loving it to some degree, and let's fashion sort of a one version of Batman that we all kind of like, and that went into with the visual stylings as well. And so we were all kind of working on it as of one mind, and that's was the genesis of the show. It took some birthing process, some birthing pains once it got the green light, but generally it took a while to get up and running, but once it was running pretty solidly after that time. And that was my thinking about it, was that let's make a unified vision of Batman that we all like. And every time I'd look at a model that Bruce Timm did, I'd go, man, that's spot on. Or Eric Radomski came up with the idea of painting vibrant colors on black paper to give Gotham its very unique look. And once they had established the visual language of what the series was going to be, it was a fabulous playground to have fun in.
Great. And so at this exact moment, Buzz, you were getting deployed. You're story editor on G.I. Joe, and you're getting deployed to write the G.I. Joe movie.
Yeah.
And this was the moment when I stopped understanding. About the time there's Cobra Law and Serpentor, and I don't even, at that point, I'm looking at it. God, I don't even know what the show is. I think that season I wrote one, very sort of safe episode from the point of view I knew all the characters. But so what was that process like?
Well, it's interesting you bring it up, because when I started story editing the second season, I had pitched to Hasbro a story that was going to be called The Most Dangerous Man in the World. And the premise was that the Frederick Nietzsche, Karl Marx of Cobra had been kept locked up in a dungeon all this time, and he escapes, and Cobra stops all their worldwide operations to track him down. And the Joes have no idea who this guy is, but they figure if Cobra wants him, we have to get him first. And when they get their hands on him, they realize he's this huge pain in the ass. And he finally escapes from the Joes as well. And the Joes goes, he's out there causing trouble for Cobra, just let him go. And so I had pitched this, and they liked it. And they they accepted it. They accepted the outline, and they said, go to script and just remember to work in the Cobra Emperor. And I said, the Cobra who? And they said, the Cobra Emperor. And I said, well, who's the Cobra Emperor? And they said, well, he's the supreme leader of Cobra. And I said, no, he's not. We've just done an entire series where Cobra Commander is the supreme leader. You have to explain where the Cobra Emperor comes from. They go, okay, well, come up with a couple of ideas. So this is advice I give to writers, young writers. If a producer tells you to come up with a couple of ideas, don't. Come up with the one idea you like and present it to them, because if they could come up with ideas, they wouldn't be hiring you.
Yeah.
I came up with two ideas. One, that they build Cobra Serpentor. And the other is that there is a secret organization behind Cobra that has been funding and, guiding Cobra Commander all this time. So I send both ideas in, and they said, we love it. Get to work on it. And I said, which one? And they said, both of them. So the building Serpentor from the DNA of all of these great generals and warriors in the past, that became the miniseries Arise, Serpentor, Arise. And then the Cobra Law thing was, that became the G.I. Joe movie. And again, this is also advice I pass along. If you're going to come up with a placeholder name, come up with the filthiest, most unusable name you possibly can, because otherwise some suit will fall in love with your bad idea and won't let you change it. And so I called it Cobra Law just as a shorthand, because I'd figure, of course, they're going to recognize Shangri-La. They're not going to do that. They fell in love with it. So,
well, there you go.
Yeah.
Oh, Doug says he's here. Doug Booth is showing up. I guess, is he waiting in the lobby?
Don't see him yet, but as soon as I see it pop in there, we'll get him in.
Okay, good. Just ping him on Facebook and say, because he just pinged me to say I'm here, and I'm saying I don't see you. But anyway,
that's very true, Buzz. A lot of times you give executives more; they'll want everything, and they'll mash them all together.
Yeah.
All right. So tricks for dealing with executives. I liked one thing they used to at Sunbow in the early days, and I think we stopped it later on, but I've started doing it to myself. And I like the thing that we used to do where, Hasbro would approve, or Sunbow or somebody would approve a springboard. It'd be like one sentence, Cobra creates a weather machine to control Earth's weather, and Joe's something like that. Do 3 takes on it. And I always kind of like that, because what you do is, Doug Booth made it. Look, he's actually lit this time.
All right.
Yeah. All right. There you are. We're just talking about tricks, ways to handle people who are giving you no.
Oh, there it is. Hey, Doug.
But I remember this, Doug, that early on, they would have approved springboards. I mean, what we were doing a show, we would use the following 6 characters and 2 vehicles in the show.
Yep.
Okay, use, if it's Transformers, use Ashtray, Dipstick, and Nozzle, and then they tell you they discontinued Wiper and Cigarette Lighter. Yeah, they just all had car names.
They literally sent us one time a list that included sandbags. They said, make sure you use the official G.I. Joe sandbags. And I'm going, it is a military base. They're tripping over sandbags.
Truth is, I didn't find that to be a bad, so the way you get the assignment is you had to work all this stuff in there. And it always, you had to use the swamp buggy and, the Arctic crawler. And so it told you, okay, well, you can have one scene that happens in the swamp, and it made things happen all over the place. It actually was a pretty good kind of random, thing, because go back and look at the episodes, and they really are very kind of colorful that way, and that you change environments and stuff. But the thing we had was that so you would get an approved springboard, so you didn't have to guess in what story they'd accept, but you do 3 takes on it. And the first take inevitably from everybody was, and you have to do like 1 paragraph take. This is right, 5 pages. your first one would be the right down the center of the bowling alley, the Cobra invents the weather machine, store version. And then the other one would be the, some variation on that where you just kind of dogleg it in some funny way. And then finally, by the time you got to number 3, it's like, I don't have any ideas. And then you come up with a really wild idea. Okay. And I'd say we bought, each one of 1, 2, or 3 in, 33% of the time. I mean, what it did is it forced you to think your way all the way around the story and bits and pieces of other thoughts and get in there.
Did they ever do something like?
Was that for Joe?
Sorry.
Was that for both? Okay, go ahead, Paul.
I'm sorry. Did they ever do something like, okay, you gave us 3 premises. Can we take the desert action from this one, the swamp action from number 2, and the character beat from number 3 for Flint and Lady J, and mix them all together?
Oh yeah, that is what it would normally almost always end up. I mean, it would be that, because what you had is you now had this grab bag of ideas, to do it from, and if and usually it was me picking, it was story editors at that point. Obviously Jay, weigh in on it and all that, and we'd talk to him. But and a lot of times you wouldn't pick the one that the writer was prepared to write. Yeah. So you'd kind of negotiate their stuff back into it. But I think almost always it led to interesting episodes. Yeah, it was a way to sort of trick out cool stuff.
Yeah, we used Don Glut for episodes of Joe and Transformers, and Don always pitches 3 stories first. He pitches the dinosaur story, the Frankenstein story, and the mummy story. And you just sit there and you let him pitch the first 3. And then the 4th one is the one you want to talk about, because that's the one where he comes up with a new idea. But you just have to let him get the first 3 out, But he turned in good stuff. I mean, he did good scripts for us.
I discovered a fascinating thing about Don Bluth that I didn't know. Don Glut. That I didn't know, and that is he was in the same class at USC as George Lucas and John Milius, and Kaiser. I didn't know that. Yeah. I mean, I was watching a special about Milius, and sure enough, there's Don Glut, and it's, what's he doing on there?
And another astounding little known fact about Don Glut is every morning after he wakes up, the next thing he does is 100 push-ups.
Really?
Then he goes about his day.
Wow.
And that was from the Transformers convention where we were all getting together not that long ago. So this is a recent thing for Don.
Well, I ran into him. We're going to get him on the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Facebook. And he's working on a thing called Creeps magazine. I think he's just writing for it. He may be an editor. I don't know. But I was talking to him about it. It's basically creepy, and I went and got a subscription. I decided, I want to support, a little magazine. So I got it, and it's actually really good. I mean, I read the Creeps magazine every month, and a lot of it takes me back to when I loved creepy and eerie back in, when I was a kid.
Can I get in real quick my favorite Don Glut story?
Well, I was going to tell this. I went to a party at Don's house once years ago, like decades ago, and it was like a caveman dinosaur party. I mean, is there any other kind? And
for Don, no.
No. And he had gotten some not life-size, but large sculpted dinosaurs from either some theme park or some exhibit around, and they were in the yard, and everything was all lit up. And I remember a girl showed up with a wolf. She had actually brought a live wolf on.
Oh, I remember eBay. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Huge. He was huge.
I mean, and somebody said, "That dog looks like a wolf," and I said, "I think that is a wolf." And at one point, the wolf is being as well behaved as it could be, but at one point, the wolf kind of brushes up against me, and it's like a solid mass of muscle, and you realize this is no dog, and you just sort of back away from the wolf and the young woman who had the wolf had him on a chain, and the wolf was remarkably well behaved.
He was a sweetheart.
A lot of the people there.
But Paul, the other Don Glut party was the Godzilla party, where he had the 16-foot Godzilla statue on the roof of his garage.
Yeah.
And the LAPD helicopters came around with spotlights.
Missed that one. Did they think he was
Because Godzilla was there?
Like he was,
God, they thought Godzilla was there. I don't know. They'd heard about Don. I don't know.
The
I mean,
origin
legendary.
of
Did he
Don's
arrange for
fabulous
Tom?
dinosaur house, though, after his divorce, he was sitting in his house and he was going through because Don is this huge dinosaur buff. I mean, he's actually a legitimate authority on dinosaurs.
Sure.
And he was reading a museum magazine, and in the back of the magazine there was an ad for a life-size Tyrannosaurus Rex replica skull. The thing is about the size of a Volkswagen.
Yeah.
Oh,
It
yeah.
cost at the time $1,800.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, I wish I could buy that. And then he thinks, well, I've got $1,800 in the bank. I can buy it. Now, wait a minute. If I bought it, where can I put it? I can put it in my living room.
Of
I'm
course.
divorced. Nobody's going to stop me. And
Of
that's where the
course.
whole dinosaur house came from.
Wow.
That's right. I remember that coffee table.
You have to be divorced to pull that kind of stuff off.
You do. You
Yeah.
do. You absolutely do.
That would not fly in my house. You know, Terry's been trying to execute the suit of armor for years now, and unfortunately,
Or married to a very tolerant magician. So.
yeah. I think you're maybe the only person I know that could get away with the.
Well, it's my animation cells and her machine of death in the living room.
Yeah.
So
All right. So this gets to an interesting topic. I'm trying to figure those things nobody ever talks about.
Yeah.
The weirdest places we went in that era. Okay, one of them, Acker Mansion. You were there the day. I'm sure all you guys went to the Acker Mansion.
Yeah.
oh yeah.
I went together. There's a picture of us together at the Acker Mansion. There's a guy named Forrest J. Ackerman, and he had a thing called the Acker Mansion. And what it was just this. I just looked at it as a tinderbox, because I looked at it as like priceless treasure. And you could argue that a lot of stuff was fake or wasn't what it was supposed to be or whatever you want, but just the sheer volume. Like they had every single copy of Secret Agent X. Yeah, pulp. He had every one of them there, and every crime pulp I ever wanted. I mean, I just in my eye, it's in the book, but my eyes were like bugging out. Acker Mansion was something I didn't know because Don Glut, nobody mentioned, is he had 1,500 dinosaurs in the house. Remember that?
Yeah. I used to go there to do research.
Oh my God.
When Filmation was doing Flash Gordon, I went up there and said, "Can I look through some of your files on Flash Gordon?" Because I wanted some information, some background information on the original serials, because they weren't everywhere at that point. DVDs.
Right.
DVDs were years away, but even VHS tapes, they were spotty and hard to find. So I went up there and looked at tons of old Flash Gordon publicity materials and stills and things. And of course,
by the way, we don't mention Flash Gordon on the show.
all the stuff.
Just kidding.
So
you were at the Acker Mansion doing that?
yeah, I went up there because he had a lot of science fiction stuff. And while I was there, there's the Seven Faces of Dr. Lau and the robot from Metropolis and everything. It was like,
oh my gosh.
Like Wonka's candy factory. It's amazing to walk around in there.
So Ed, what's the weirdest place you
one Ackerman story. I was introduced to him, but I really didn't know who he was. I was introduced to him in John Davison's office. He had read RoboCop and he had some notes, and he was very serious. And he gave me a bunch of pretty good notes early in the process. And that was a sort of a John Davison thing to do. He would just introduce you to someone, say, "Listen to this guy." Anyway, so that was my Forrest Ackerman story.
Well, I actually heard of him long before. It was Paul Davids that took us. Another guy we had to get on sometime. Paul Davids took us over there. I mean, he was the connection. But I'd had one sort of semi-encounter with him years earlier when I think it was Ray Bradbury told my dad, because they knew each other fairly well, told my dad, my dad wanted to do some research, and there's a guy named Forrest Ackerman, who'll do that. And Dad thought, oh, great. And Dad wrote him a letter. And back comes this envelope. And at this point, I'm just out of college. I've been exposed to no geek stuff whatsoever. I mean, other than, Buck Rogers stuff lying around my house. But I mean, all of this was alien to me. And I get Amazing Forries magazine. Okay. And it was with Forrest J. Ackerman on the cover of it, a drawing of him. It looked like Amazing Stories. and it was just a magazine about this guy. And I had no idea what to make of it. You know, he was talking about, I charge 125. I think Dad hired him to do some research, but you know, I was thinking somebody like gets paid to do research on old comic strips. I mean, I didn't even know that existed.
Right.
Yeah, that was my first encounter with him. But yeah, I remember going over to the Acker Mansion, and that was one of the weird things. All right, so what weird places have you been, or anybody that can think? I mean, because this.
Okay, I got one. When I was working at Geek, Robbie London. Oh, wait a minute. Who? Paul, you didn't come with us, did you?
Was this
Frank Zappa's house?
Yeah, I was there.
You were there. You were there. Of course you were there.
That was me, you, and Robbie London, and we went up to talk to Frank and Moon at Zappa.
And
was that at the log cabin in Log
somebody did a performance of Valley Girl. Moon must have.
Yeah.
And what did Gail do? His wife. She did something.
She was just sort of like the hostess for the evening.
She was the hostess, and Frank told us the time he climbed over the wall to Bob Dylan's house. And
oh no, I think it was like Dylan had come over. Like,
oh no, Dylan climbed over Frank Zappa's wall.
Yeah, that's how he started off.
He wanted Frank to produce his next album.
Yeah.
And he was in one of his kind of down and out situations, so he climbed over the fence.
Yeah.
And said, "Hey man, I'm like Bob."
I remember Frank saying like the dog was his dog. I think the dog's name was Doggus or something. Was barking at him, and Frank came out to see what the dog was barking at. It was Bob Dylan who climbed the gate.
This happened while you were there?
No, Bob Dylan didn't go over the wall while we were there, but Frank was telling us the story.
Oh, I see.
Because Geek they thought they wanted to do a show with Frank Zappa. They wanted to do Valley Girls.
Right.
So that's why you're
no, it's Filmation, wasn't it? It was Filmation.
Was it Filmation?
Yeah,
oh, it's Filmation. So. Oh, well, Robbie could have been from either place, but yeah, there we go. Yeah. You're right.
Yeah, I think it was before he went over to Geek. He was still.
You're absolutely right. And I think you and I were saying, right. This is really going to happen. Of course, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Lou Scheimer, Arthur Nadell, and Frank Zappa.
I came across the development somewhere.
And then Frank pitched us his idea of what he wanted the show to be like. And he would say, there are all these studio executives, and of course they're all snorting coke. And the minute they snort coke, they turn into bozo clowns.
Yeah.
And that's our show. That's our cartoon.
And it's like, right. Frank, you're 35 years too early. I mean, come back around 2015 and go to Adult Swim. You're gold.
Oh God! But it was a wonderful evening. It was just
somebody had to put that story together and do it.
I remember telling the Dylan story to a friend of mine who worked with Bob on his Theme Time radio show. Who's a good friend of his, and I remember Frank saying that when he went down to calm down the dog, Frank made a joke saying, "Don't worry, he only bites Christians." And Bob kind of gave him a look. And I told my friend who works with him, and he goes, "Yeah, that sounds about right." So, yeah, it was. But that was a great night. And we went into the recording studio and they played some music. And
Dweezil was playing some awesome riffs on his guitar. Right. Yeah. He was about 14 at the time.
And they had a stuffed armadillo on the sound the control board, and then we went out back and looked at a glass house they'd made out of bottles. I mean, great! It was great. It was like being the Addams Family for a night.
Log cabin in Laurel Canyon? Was that?
It was on Woodrow Wilson, I think.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was great. I mean, the '80s were great in the fact that we wound up weird places. It was like strange adventures that would just take you wherever. I mean, I can't, the D&D Mansion's prime example. I never thought I'd see that place.
Yeah.
We do have some questions queued up if you guys would like to take some.
Oh, sure. Yeah, sorry. But I want to talk about strange places and people. Okay, I mean, because it's only when you have this kind of a rambling conversation you hear about Bob Dylan, you're crawling over Frank Zappa's wall. While Bob Dylan pitching you a coked out studio executive story. I mean, you don't get that anywhere else.
That would have been a great cartoon.
would have been amazing.
All right, our first
And
question
Robbie
comes.
was just sitting there going, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, sorry
Yeah.
about that, Mike.
Yep, no problem. All right, first question comes for Paul, and it relates to the Batman animated series. It's how much how much influence did the comics of the time have on your creative process for that, and what was there a particular era or a particular sort of run on the Batman comics that had a an outsized amount of influence?
Well, I'd say everything from the Denny O'Neil era up to whatever we were doing, like the early 90s. I mean, I think that was primarily where we looked at less for plot, more for sensibility and for tone, and for going for that feel for it. Batman Year One, of course, was a tremendous influence. The idea that Batman was working more at odds with the police than someone you could just summon by the bat signal or the hotline. We were going mostly for that feel, but with an eye toward, if there was a great story from the 40s or a Penguin or Joker story that we wanted to revisit and do kind of an update on, we would certainly look at that, because that brought that whole feel of imagination, of larger than life, criminal activity, the giant props, the huge set pieces. Because we're in animation, we need it to be bigger than life. But at the same time, we wanted it to be a world where the characters, the villains, played for keeps. That even though they had Tommy guns and we never really shot anybody on camera, the idea was they were behaving with lethal intent for whatever they were doing, and we were pretty true to that. And I think people picked up that we were dealing kind of with life and death stakes, and I think they kind of appreciated that.
Yeah, that'll be a really interesting topic to go into with Chuck Dixon, who we'll hopefully be able to have on too.
Yeah.
Who was actually writing the comics at the same time you were doing the animated series.
I mean, it was hard to do something that was in the comics currently, knowing that if we read a great story or there was a character that really popped, we would look at it and say, like, well, we like this new supporting character or villain, but where we've kind of got this season sort of mapped out as far as premises go, so we'd have to move it to next year, and then it would be like 2 years before the character ever really showed up in the comic, simply because of the time it took to get things through the pipeline. So that's why we would tend to go back to villains that had been around for a while and develop their personalities more in keeping with an ongoing series, or else if there was a character that we had worked in, like Montoya or Bullock or Harley, we just sort of stuck with them.
And that actually does lead into a follow-up question from Daniel Carhuna in the chat. Since Paul had the opportunity to co-create Harley Quinn for the animated series, what do you think about Harley having her own animated show now, so many years later?
I think it's great. I mean, it's like, it just shows that the character has gone on, and different creators find different things to say about him and about her, and then there's always an ongoing audience for her. I mean, it's kind of like, I kind of have to remember, like, I had anything to do with the character, because she's so much of other things now. She's in the movies, she's in she's on the cartoons, on several cartoon series, on the more adult series, and then in Superhero Girls. So when I'm in a toy store or something and I see a toy, I kind of react to her the same way I react to seeing Mickey Mouse or something. It's like, oh yeah, sorry. Oh yeah, right, okay. I had something to do with that. But no, I'm happy. A friend of a niece of a friend asked me just today, can you send me something with Harley on it? She's 6 years old, so I was looking through, okay, what's age appropriate to send her? And okay, here's a Pez, I'll send her that. And but it's cool, and I'm just happy that the character is going on and people are writing new stories about her.
Outstanding. I do have one for Buzz here. It relates to Serpentor. Rodimus Primal would like to know, was there any amount of crossover with Larry Hama in the comics when Serpentor Race was being created and being rolled out?
Larry and the writing staff at Sunbow West both of us deliberately avoided looking at what the others were doing, and it was for the same reason. we knew it would be madness to try to sync up perfectly what he was doing in the comics with what we were doing in the show. And we both, Larry, independently of one another, we all decided, you know, each format, each medium is its own story, and it just develops its own way in its own media. I met Larry years later. We're friends now, and he told me that. He said, "Yeah, I deliberately avoided looking at anything you guys were doing, and you know, we'd get a ton of comics from Marvel, and we'd toss the Transformer and GI Joe comics aside, and then we'd read, you know, the other stuff. But we deliberately kept it separate, and Hasbro, since they control the property, they were the arbiters of what was done in each version."
Outstanding. Thanks for the answer, Buzz, and thank you for asking the question, Rodimus. Back to you, Flint, and if you find a time there for questions, just give us a shout.
We're
Get some
talking
more.
about weird places. So during that interlude, Ed, did you think of any weird places you showed up at?
I'm not coming up. I'm not remembering anything that weird. There's not Bob Dylan climbing over the wall. Weird in the business. I don't know. I remember going down and finding the ballroom in the Biltmore with you, where the original Academy Awards was.
Oh yeah, remember that? Yeah. That
Yeah.
was back. That was back when, before 9/11, when you could get into places like nobody. You know, yeah. It was.
Okay, so the weirdest place I ever was actually I lived on the Paramount lot in 19. When was Desert One? Was that 70? Was that what was that? When was that? 81?
Oh, Desert One.
No, Desert.
That was 1976, I think. I think it was April
70 or 77. Okay, so I was a reader, and I lived with no place to live, so I lived on the Paramount lot for 3 months. I mean, for 3 weeks.
You live?
I lived in my office, which was in the Lucy dressing room.
Oh my God. Did they know you were there?
Great. I was there, and I was there the night that came in, and then it turned out there were other people like living on the lot. There was a divorced screenwriter right next door to me that I didn't know about. He'd been there for a month. And one night, Nick Nolte drove up in an old car or in a Camaro and parked it in front of my office. And then he didn't, with the windows open and the keys in it. And he didn't come back for several months. So I used to take the car out and go to the store. And then I would come back on the lot. And then one day, Nick Nolte walked up and he opened the trunk of the car. And he took a basketball and a bottle of bourbon that was in there and went and played basketball. That was my Nick Nolte encounter.
Yeah.
Wow. Wait, you were driving Nick Nolte's car around? Why?
Well, it was a Camaro that apparently belonged to him, but it was just parked on the lot.
Was it a convertible?
So, no, it was just a regular kind of off the line Camaro. It was like I imagine he had several of them around, you know, just parked in strategic places.
It was kind of like Zipcar or something. He just moved them around as ride shares. Yeah. Wow.
So you're living on the lot and driving
living on the lot, yeah.
Car, and you're saying you don't have any weird places.
Well,
Put that into a story. That's great.
So that's a weird enough place, and you can't do that anymore because they would come and arrest you.
The only thing I have to compare with that is like when I was working at Lucasfilm, when we were working we're up at Skywalker Ranch. Occasionally, I wouldn't go home for nights on end because the offices were so nice that they were set up like houses, and I'd just crash out there. And I'd call the security guys, and I'd say, "I don't feel like driving back to San Francisco tonight. I'm gonna sleep over." And they go like, "Do you need some bed sheets? Do you need some? Do you want some food? Do you want to stay down at the actual guest houses we have here?" It's like, "No, I got everything in my office. I'm fine." And there's a bathroom, my couch folded out. And for a while I was thinking, like, can I get away with not paying rent? Can I just do this? And
just
it's sort
live
of like,
there.
You know,
Paul.
if you're working overnight, you know, fine, stay there. Don't drive. Well, don't do that. Don't do.
It's a long way from there to anywhere.
Yeah.
What's that?
Paul, tell him the Thanksgiving turkey story.
Oh, that one. Every year they used to give us it's very nice. They used to give us a Thanksgiving turkey. You know, George was a very generous employer. And Christmas we get 2 weeks off with pay and some sort of a gift. And every Thanksgiving they have a firehouse there on the lot and at Skywalker, and they would get a bunch of boxed turkeys in from Willie Bird Turkey up in Sonoma, and George would give you free turkey to take home. And one year I'm down there, and I line up, and I'm in line for my turkey, and they said, do you want a turkey? And I said, sure, I'll take Howard the Duck. And I went home without a turkey that year. All I got was
that was not an appreciated line.
What? No, I thought I was being funny, and it's like, go. So
who was it? Who was the turkey monitor? Who rejected you?
There was the guy who ran the firehouse. And
but I mean, really, what was the beat between Howard the Duck and you don't get a turkey? What did they say? I'm not giving you a turkey.
It was as much a joke as I was making it out a joke. They put the turkey back, and I went they go, okay, here, and so they gave me one. So it was
okay.
But it was like an inappropriate joke. So.
I actually tried to get Frank Price to not do. When I was a young executive at Universal, I tried to get him to not do Howard the Duck. I was the reader on the Howard the Duck development scripts.
Wow.
And I said, I really think there's something wrong with this. I think you have to go back to the comics. And the answer was that they had George Lucas aboard, and that he knew what he was doing. This was after E.T. at Columbia, which Frank let go. So he wasn't going to let. The one going to let Howard the Duck.
He let Star Wars go too.
Did he? Was he had it? He had that at Universal.
Yeah, Frank Price. Lucas pitched it to him, and he said, "Hey, get the robots out of here," and he said, and he's sort of living that down. That's later why he jumped on Buck Rogers, like the hour Star Wars came out. That's the only reason I know that story. No, that's. I mean, what I love about this is. All these stories are things that almost could not happen in the world now. I mean, things are happening that could not have happened in the 80s. Mm-hmm. But you just didn't have that kind of. Remember, after the Amblin Christmas party, you go wander around the back lot at Universal. I mean, try that nowadays.
Oh yeah. Oh, I remember that. I ran into you and Sherry at the Amblin Christmas party that one year.
Yeah.
We're sort of hanging out. It was fun.
Yeah. It's like, hey, let's go through the back lot. We'll take our own tour. I mean, post 9/11, post fires, post everything. That's not going to happen in this lifetime.
I don't know. It was a different world then. Like I don't know if they still have them, but they used to have 4th of July picnics up at Skywalker, and wander around and just do the egg toss and the 3-legged race and stuff like that. They'd have a local band playing. It was fun, but I don't know. Do they even have lot parties anymore, or does that still go on to some degree? No, I know it. Not this year.
Yeah, it's really.
Well, you probably could, because I mean, you could social distance on the back lot, but I don't think. No, I think that's
I was going to say one other Sunbow-related strange occurrence that took place. I was story editing and co-producing a show called Glow Friends, which was part of the My Little Pony half hour, and it was actually a wonderful show. And we had a really good producer, and in the middle of, and it was cute little forest creatures that emitted their own light. And when we had bad guys, including, if you remember The Trouble with Tribbles, Roger C. Carmel, the actor who played the intergalactic trader who was feisting off Tribbles, he was our lead villain. And he was hilarious. And he would show up in tracksuits with towels around his neck. People would have to wake him up from his motel on Franklin Avenue to get to the recording session sometime, but he was great. But our producer, in the middle of our show, suddenly had, I don't know if you remember this, but around that time, people were having suppressed memories of cults.
Yes.
That was a big thing that was happening. He had grown up in a very strict religious Christian household, probably in Utah. And in the middle of our show, he suddenly started remembering that actually his parents were Satanists and he had been part of a satanic cult. It was
While you're
like
doing Blow Friend?
while we were doing this, cute little, really fun show, and all of a sudden our producer is remembering that the devil was actually his godfather as a child.
Oh, man.
I'm
Well,
not
Man.
sure what exactly it did to the show, but it was really an interesting adjunct.
Well, yeah, what's funny about that was, okay, here's your trivia question. What Sunbow show was protested by Christian ministers? Okay, was it Inhumanoids, where you have a guy sitting in a molten lava bath in the center of the earth with horns? No.
My Little Pony.
That's right. One on
Really?
that tattoo, there was a satanic symbol. And My Little Pony had a major crisis.
What was
Yeah.
it, like a star or something, a pentagram, or
Probably an upside down pentagram, or even not an upside, probably a right side up pentagram, and they were upset with that.
There was that, and then Buzz actually knows the whole story about Thomas Radecki. I just encountered him. He ambushed Gary and I on a radio show. The Michael Jackson, not the singer Michael Jackson, was a radio host guy, Michael Jackson. Gary and I were on the show, and Thomas Radecki ambushed us. But
who was he? Was like a censor or an educator type guy? Or?
Yeah, he was a children's television violence guy, but turned out he had a interesting thing happen to him. What was it, Buzz? What happened to Thomas?
He had relations with a client, and I can't remember if the client was underage or not, but the fact that he had relations with a client, he was a therapist of some kind, and he ended up going to prison for it.
Wow.
I mean, when you see the mugshot of him when he goes to prison, you go, yeah, I absolutely believe this guy would do that sort of thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, we've got a couple of questions here if you guys would like to take those. All right, first one's going to be for Ed, and this comes from the chat, and it's how much did you and Paul Verhoeven have sort of being involved in or collaborating with sort of working out the balance between practical effects in Robocop and more of what was pre-CGI special effects at the time?
Well, I think mostly that went to John Davison was the guy who knew Rob Bottin and Phil Tippett, which are two wildly talented guys, one a sculptor, rubber guy, and the other stop motion. And both of those were in there. And then we had some matte paintings done by Rocco Joffrey. And I think that's all because of what John Davison knew. Paul was aware of effects work, but had not really done that much of it in Europe. He was looking forward to coming to America to do really good makeup and really good visual effects like that. And then when Phil, who did Ed 209 for Robocop, went on, of course, to wrangle dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. And he was our way into doing Starship Troopers, and he kind of had a lot to do with that getting made.
Well, Starship Troopers at the time was the most CG film ever, as I recall. Was that true?
I think it had more shots. It was the most expensive movie ever greenlit, and it had 500 shots in it, which was way up from Jurassic that had 68 or 64 or something like that. And now it's routine that you make a movie with 1,500, 2,000 visual effects shots.
Great question and great answers. All right, we've got one for Flint here from Daniel Carhoonan. Was it a tough job to write 12 out of 13 episodes while also coming up with a story with Larry Parr for an episode that had the teleplay by Buzz Dixon for the Inhumanoids show?
Inhumanoids was, I guess we're not getting ahead of ourselves here. We can talk a little bit about Inhumanoids. Inhumanoids was the weirdest thing in that the show just kind of, it kind of came out of nowhere. I was back in New York, and Tom Griffin, and oddly enough, what was weird about Inhumanoids is I mostly remember Tom explaining the show to me. Joe wasn't really, because the cliche was Joe was a creative guy and Tom was a business guy, but that was not, in fact, the real case. Tom had this really good vision for it. And then finally we went to script, and it was exactly, I can tell you when it was. It was the week of my 30th birthday. We went to script, and I'd quit smoking then. And so I'm going through nicotine withdrawals the whole time I'm writing the miniseries. And your head's really cottony when you're going through nicotine withdrawal, so you can't really remember it. You know, I mean, I mean, making it sound more extreme than it is, but it's pretty extreme. Is I would have to write stuff, you know, to the outline. I couldn't really remember what I'd done before it, and you know, and so it was the most like in the moment writing I've ever done. And I wrote the miniseries in a week. And Tom said, you know, we're not trying to set the land speed record. And I said, I gotta occupy my mind with something. It might as well be in humanoids. It was funny, between that and the really dubious animation we got. I mean, actually the first episode, some of the stuff was brilliant. But then after that, we got, it was when Marvel Sunbow relationship was kind of falling apart. The show has this really jagged quality, and I can't tell how much of it was just shots we didn't get in because we wouldn't get shots, we wouldn't get scenes, and we'd have to make it in post. But no, I loved Inhumanoids. Inhumanoids, of all the properties, is the one I have the most unfinished business with. You know, that's you know, sometime I want to revisit it. I mean, you know, I want to revisit Joe and Transform. I like all that stuff, but Inhumanoids feels kind of unfinished to me. But yeah, I loved working on that show. Yeah, and Buzz came in, and I think I was fried or something, and he came in and said, and maybe it was I was working on the movie, and he wrote that episode.
Oh, great question, and great answer. We do actually have a question for you. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Buzz. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
I was just going to say the voice actors rebelled on my script because I had like all these zombified teenagers chanting "kill, kill, kill," and the voice actors are going, "Whoa, can we do this?" And I said, "Yeah. I mean, the toy line's been canceled. We've basically been told as long as the FCC doesn't complain, do whatever you want." You know.
All right. That actually leads into the next question for you, Buzz. It's sort of a similar vein. Agent Axiom asks, was Destro's subliminal message in Sins of Our Fathers some kind of a direct response to the type of panic you described with the My Little Pony situation, or was that just kind of an overall jab at the climate of the time?
I'm trying to remember precisely what it was. I was, when the satanic panic started in the 80s, it sounded plausible. It sounded like, yeah, there could have been something like this. And then as it went further and further along, you began to realize how ridiculous it was and how these kids were being manipulated by people who were trying to get them to say things that happened when the kids didn't want to say that the things that happened. And I think virtually every case where they got convictions in the 80s have since been overturned and thrown out in, you know, appeals and whatnot, because none of the stuff added up. None of it made any sense. And they never found, I'll take that back, they almost never found any evidence of actual child abuse, much less the satanic abuse. And when they did find the satanic abuse, it turned out to be just your regular run-of-the-mill pedophiles who added a satanic twist so that if they were ever outed by the kids, they could say, well, that's all crazy stuff. That never happened. There's like a ton of books and articles on what had happened at that point and why it happened, and we could do hours talking about it. So I'm just going to cut it off right here.
All right. Thank you for the answer, and thank you for the question.
What is fun about that? I mean, not fun about that, but really interesting about it is the stuff people believe then. Remember, there was, you know, everybody was into the Kennedy assassination conspiracy stuff. Mm-hmm. UFOs were really huge at that point. I mean, every like, it was like life was one big alternate reality game.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was what's fun about the era, and we used that a lot in the shows. Because when you have 65 episodes, you know, you're taking your idea from anywhere you can get it, you know, and the world was providing a lot of them, which is how Buzz got me in trouble with Casey Kasem and Carbamia. Buzz, it was about Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, and Buzz named a country Carbamia, and Casey Kasem objected to it, and that
just walked right off the show, as I recall.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was later on, but yeah, it was, I think the third time Carbamia made it in there, and Joe and Tom wouldn't do anything about it. It's like, yeah, because it was not a slur on Arabs; it was very specific reference to, you know, his name was, you know, Omar Fakadi or something like, you know, some anagram of Gaddafi. It wasn't like we were taking a real good guy and bad mouth.
Well, jumping all the way back to Ruby Spears, we used to buy every week a copy of the World Weekly News, which was like the bottom basement tabloid. It was this black and white tabloid, never had any celebrity stuff in it. It always had the Bat Boy. It had Bat Boy. That was like their mascot. Every other week, Bat Boy was up to some weird thing. And we would get this and just read it at the writers' meetings. And if we couldn't get like 2 or 3 story ideas out of it, I mean, it was a bad week.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Fate magazine is another good one. You know, if you can find Fate magazine, you know, they still publish, but I think it's like 4 or 5 times a year. But on the cover, you know, it's sea serpents, spaceships, crystal skulls, the devil's footprints walking through a snowy, you know, the whole thing, ghosts, everything. Good, great resource material, but you know, they never actually find anything. So.
No, that's the problem. Mostly because it doesn't exist. But I mean, you're still looking. But I mean, that was back in that era, sort of, with non-ubiquitous media, where this stuff was a little possible. It was possible Bigfoot was walking around, and I mean, did I believe it? No, but it was possible. You know, there could be something, because you weren't walking around with the phone. I mean, think about smartphones changed everything, because everybody has a camera all the time.
Right.
Then it was very rare that you would carry around a camera, and at best you get some grainy shot because you'd inevitably run out of film just as you got the shot of Bigfoot. It was much more plausible.
Right.
I mean, in some ways, we've demystified the world to the point where, we don't, it's gotten kind of uninteresting.
Well, yeah, now you can go on any dozen of websites or on YouTube, and, Bigfoot footage here, you have your choice of it. And it's like lob squatch, something out of focus. That's my dad, just things that are just little smears walking across. So they've never actually gotten like a really good photo of him going like, the Patterson-Gimlin footage is probably the best. And I think that's been pretty thoroughly debunked at this point. But
well, one of the little known things about Paul Dini is you actually went to Tasmania to find the Tasmanian wolf.
Yeah. Right there on my wall. There's a painting of one. So
yeah,
got a couple of them. But
yeah.
Yeah.
And he got chased around by a Komodo dragon too. Paul's actually had like real live adventures. I've done that.
Every time I get a vacation, I go to some weird place, and go looking for the weird animals, and I usually, wind up running from them or having some sort of bizarre encounter. So that's I think that's fodder for another story, for another time.
Okay.
Well, no, I mean, what's really funny is I was planning. So we got like 15 minutes left, but I was planning this to all just be about writer process, because people were asking me about that after the last episode, and instead we got into a thing about the 80s, which I think is really because I mean it was such a fascinating time where you could turn up in these really weird places, and I mean, we all had encounters with strange kinds of celebrities, and I would say, I mean, just stuff that wouldn't happen now, quite the same.
Yeah.
I mean, because a lot of those kind of people don't, celebrities aren't very mysterious anymore. They used to be really mysterious. I mean, going to Frank Zappa's house. I mean, really, I mean, and or being up at the Lucasfilm Ranch. That was a very rare treat, or the D&D mansion. Now it's like that'd be on some reality show or something.
I remember one time I got a call. This was like I was 1979. I was like a kid, just arrived in LA, and a friend of mine had a job working in finance at ABC. He calls me up and he says, "You like the Muppets, right?" Said, "Sure. Yeah, everyone likes the Muppets." He goes, "Well, they're here. You want to come over and watch them shoot?" I said, yeah. So I sped over to the ABC studios on Prospect Avenue over in near Silver Lake, Los Feliz, and they were doing a Christmas special. And I walk in, and they're all there, and Jim Henson, Frank Oz, and Richard Hunt are there. And I am terrified. I hate being on film sets. I started saying that earlier. If when I write something, I don't even want to show up at shooting, because people are always telling me, get out of the way, move over here. So I wind up eating, at craft services the rest of the day and go home feeling bad. So I just don't like it unless there's some actual need for me to be there. But this was like I was very excited to be there, and I'm standing off to the side and hoping nobody notices me or throws me out. And I'm watching them, and Jim Henson is taking a break, and he's like right there. I go, don't say anything. You're going to get thrown out. They're going to kick you out. You're going to look like an idiot. Oh, don't say anything. Don't say anything. But of course, I go over and I said, hi, Mr. Henson. I used to watch you on Ed Sullivan all the time when I was a little kid. Really love the Muppets. And he said, oh, great. Come on over here. And he took me over and he had me stand with the puppeteers, and I got to watch them shoot the rest of the day. And it was like unbelievable. And he'd do a shot and he goes, how'd that look? And I'd go,
but by all accounts, he was just a great guy. I met him one time.
Yeah, well, I mean, did you ever meet him through Lisa? Or
I met him one time. Lisa had a New Year's Eve party when she was living in Silver Lake, and Sam Raimi had a place.
I remember that was where I remember meeting you. That's
right.
Oh yeah,
that's right. Yeah, I mean that.
And Jim was there wearing a tuxedo, and he was extremely shy, and you couldn't get anything out of it at all. I remember.
Yes, yeah, it was, but he seemed like just a great guy, really, really sweet guy. That was New Year's Day. I showed up with Bettina. You can imagine how that went. That was, it's just, I don't remember how that happened, but I did.
Oh yeah.
All right. So just we talked a little bit about the shows and picking the stuff, but you guys, okay, these are all what's interesting. You look at all these people; these are guys that have had multi-decade careers. This is extremely rare.
Yeah.
Okay. The average writer's career lasts as long as the average NFL player's career. It's like 3.5 years. That's literally what they're telling me at the Guild. It's like,
Wow.
All right, so. Let's talk about that for just a few seconds, and then I will have honored my commitment to talk about that. All right, so let's it's just the who, what, when, where, and why. Okay, so the where question is: am I looking at everybody's office here except Doug?
Oh, actually, this is my office. I'm in Topanga now.
Oh, okay. Oh,
it's a little bit messy at the moment. Hasn't been organized, but yeah, this is my office actually.
And Ed, you're in your okay. Does everybody here do most of their writing in their office, or are there people they're like laptop? But I'm saying when we're not in lockdown. I mean, in real life, it's in your office.
Oh yeah, mostly here. I have another office. I'll
so you're writing on. Wait, did everybody here start writing on a typewriter, like actually before word processors?
Oh yeah.
Everybody here knew what whiteout was.
Yep.
Knew what that paper was. You'd put that in there.
Yeah, I bought a Hots Electric because I'd had autocorrect on it.
Oh yeah, go back. I would remember the last 5 characters and go back or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. So and then the transition, because I started pretty early on the word processor because my dad, right after they moved to Carmel, that's when they sold Buck Rogers. And he actually, he sold his company and was effectively retired for the newspaper syndicate. But all of a sudden now he had to do a lot of paperwork, and I had found out about word processors. This was in 1970, late 77, early 78. And so we worked out a deal where if I set up a secretarial service for him, because the whole goal was to figure out how to get his secretarial stuff to pay for itself, and I think he wanted to teach me something about business. So we set up a secretarial service in Carmel. I mean, one of you guys might have been there at one point or another. It was in Monterey. It was the Cypress Word Shop. It was there for 25 years.
Wow.
Long after the family left. But we got deck-made computers, and that was like in 78. So very little of my professional career was working on real typewriters. I don't think ever
Wow.
Because
I wrote one screenplay on a typewriter, and then I bought I did buy an Epson word processor as soon as they came out. It really, I think probably I work on a computer more than anything else. I really think I ought to be writing on yellow pads personally, but I'm lazy and I'm always seduced back to the word processor.
I do every first draft on a yellow pad.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's the right way to do it.
And when I write a cartoon, I sketch out, like just stick figures about action and things like that. Not so much for action adventure, but if I'm doing something like a Looney Tune or a Tom and Jerry, it all goes on, just the most wretched, horrible off-model drawings you can imagine. But that's how I can kind of block out gags, is if I draw them here and I figure out more how to describe it, so that the director will kind of have an idea of going like, oh, okay, what he's getting at is something like this. And so they can, and rarely I'll take in my sketch and show him like what I'm thinking of, and when he stops either laughing or vomiting, he can, actually transcribe that and go, okay, what do you think you're doing is this?
Well, wait. So let's be fair here. Paul actually has art skills. Ed actually has art skills. I don't even know whether Buzz and Doug have art skills. Do you guys have art skills? You're serviceable.
I can draw a cartoon well enough that you can guess what it is I'm drawing.
Oh, yeah, no,
I gotta interrupt. Paul, do you remember the Tiny Toons that I pitched to you? The
Which
music one? I came in and pitched to Paul on Tiny Toons. I said the Tiny Toons deliver a piano to the tune of the Hungarian Rhapsody. And he said, I'll buy it, because they were doing a classical music show and it fit in perfectly.
Right.
Then I went back and I had to figure out, how do you write a script where you time it to the music?
Right.
So instead of writing a script, and this is back when there were still LPs around.
All right.
I got an LP of the Hungarian Rhapsody, and instead of playing it at 33 1/3, I played it at 45 RPM to pick it up.
That's right.
And I narrated what was happening to the music. Falling, bookcases falling, and now they run this way. And we gave that to the animators. I never put anything down on paper. I just handed over a cassette tape.
Oh, that's great.
That's right. I mean, it's
wow, that's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a mystery to me how they would do cartoons so perfectly synchronized to music back in the classic days. I know they're trying to reinvent that now with a lot of the contemporary cartoons. It is really hard to do, but it's so satisfying when you see the two of them work together. I think that's a prerequisite of every great cartoon character, is they have to do Hungarian Rhapsody at some point. Like the Tiny Toons did it, Bugs did it, Tom and Jerry did it, Fox and Crow did it. They did it in Roger Rabbit. You have to do it. I mean, it's sort of like it's like getting your cartoon character driver's license.
Yeah.
Do 7 minutes to Hungarian Rhapsody.
It's sort of a reverse engineer, and the way Gordon taught me to time a script was to just do the sound effects. You know what I mean? You just go, the planes,
right.
And then you just turn your stopwatch off for how long you think the gunshots are. I mean, that was I mean, it's really sad Gordon's not around, because he knew so much of this stuff. It's like attached to that. He
could draw like flawlessly.
Oh, he was like a real artist. You could be if you decide to focus on it. I have no idea. Ed can draw. I'm the only person in the animation business who can draw. I can draw.
Me too.
Yeah, I mean, I draw no better, no worse than it was.
With a Winsor Newton #7 brush, trying to ink like Walt Kelly, and going to bed every night crying or in frustration, going, "I can't do this. No one can do this." Walt Kelly.
Have you ever drawn a comic book?
What?
Who? Have you ever drawn a comic book?
Who, me?
Yeah.
No.
Or you've ever done the pencils and have someone else ink them?
I mean, occasionally I draw something, or if I could, I'd do a sketch and, maybe, Bruce Timm would ink over it or something, like very rarely, like for a party invitation or something like that. Or I worked with such great artists that I felt like I play in a band, like I'm a band leader, and I'm like Bob Wills. I'm out there going like, everybody dance. But I might be able to plunk out Happy Birthday on the piano, but I'm not gonna try and play the piano. I'm gonna go out and get a really great piano player to back me up in my band.
One thing I saw you doing one time though, for Paul, when you're writing, is, and I can't remember whether it was Droids or whether it was Batman, but I remember you had all the figures on your desk.
Yeah.
You kind of remember who was in the scene, and you sort of have them, staged and all that.
Yeah. I'll do that. I break out the
never
action
crossed
figures
my
and move
mind
around
to
a
do
little
that.
bit. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of times directors will do that. I think I'd seen a picture.
Yeah, George Lucas did that quite a lot. Phil Tippett talked about working on Star Wars that way, and they would really work these things out with little cameras and little sets and figure out how they were going to stage them.
Yeah, I got it.
You all know the classic
chase and raid down like this with the little figures.
You all know the classic story about Raymond Chandler and The Big Sleep. They're adapting The Big Sleep. Lee Brackett and William Faulkner are working on the screenplay. And they're going through it and they're plotting it out and they can't figure out who kills the chauffeur. And so they go, well, Chandler lives here in Los Angeles. Let's just pick up the phone. So they pick up the phone and said, we're breaking the story down for the script. Who killed the chauffeur? And there's this long pause, and then Chandler goes, "Damn."
Yeah, well, I mean, Raymond Chandler interviews among. There's an interview where Ian Fleming is interviewing Raymond Chandler, and Ian Fleming is the straight man in this interview, right? Chandler has probably had a few cocktails at this point, and you can tell Ian Fleming was the ultimate Raymond Chandler fanboy, and that's when I figured out what James Bond was, and it was a English gentleman's, adventure story with a certain amount of hard-boiled American detective in it. Mm-hmm. Whereas Bond did not behave like the English guys, and you can tell that's probably something he got from Chandler. What about you guys? What tricks do you do for writing? What's your method? You sketch stuff out. You just outline it. You use figures. Any of that stuff?
I'll work backwards sometimes if I'm mapping out a story. Like I'll figure out if there's a crime story or a superhero story or something. I'll just start with an image in my head that I want to leave the audience with. Like when I was writing Batman, we were doing a more tragic, darker take on Mr. Freeze, and nobody had written a story about him yet. So I said, I'll take the first Mr. Freeze story. And Bruce Timm and Alan Burnett and I decided, okay, this guy is dead to emotion. He's very cold to people around him. He's just bitter. He's very clipped in his dialogue and no emotion at all. And I was thinking, okay, if he has no emotion, he's got to have an Achilles heel. What's going to, I want to, the last image is him crying and his tears becoming snowflakes. I go, okay, so what breaks him down? So I thought, okay, that's the image I want to leave the audience with, him crying in a cell in the snow. So how do we get to that point? So I said, okay, his wife died. He wasn't able to save her. He froze her. That gives him this tragic core to go back to. And the rest of it kind of just fell into place, because I really wanted to get to that final image.
Well, because Ed said he started with Robocop, seeing a Robocop in the middle of a street, and Blade Runner, right?
Yeah, I've often found that looking around at things and staging in particular, more often than I will draw staging or an overhead plan view of a set than I will actually draw a frame or something like that. I know that it's often the staging that I'm worried about. Where will the person come from, and how will the set work, and stuff like that.
Oh, like the one thing I will do, and especially with battle scenes or fight complex scenes, is I will map them out like it's a game board. Yeah, I mean that's the one skill I bring from somewhere else that I'll actually do. Mm-hmm. And you just sort of remember, okay, this thing's here, this thing's got to be here, and it's got to come over from here. That's kind of an interesting thing. Yeah, you're just figuring out the physics and the timing of it. I mean, that's as far as my art skills go.
I'm going to show you something that is this is the only time I have ever done this. And I'm starting a new project, and without going into detail, it had a lot of real world visual references for it. And what I did, you can see this, I have broken down the color indicates a specific type, and then there are initials on the cover that indicate subtypes. And then I've got all these little notes jotted down here as to what the emotion is that I get off of that, what the idea is I get off a particular image. And it doesn't mean that this stuff is going to make it into the final project. But what it's letting me do is just kind of organize and get a feel for what these visuals are. And when I actually start writing it, I don't think I'm going to be referring to it page by page, but I'm going to have a flow to it. I'm going to have an idea to it. But it's literally tens of thousands of visual images that I'm going through. So,
that's funny. I did this with a timeline. All the colors are different moods.
Yeah.
And you put the mood in there so you see if it's all, one mood.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't actually, ever finish it was too complex a technical tool to work with to do it, but it at least made me think about, okay, you got this mood, and you contrast this with this. And I tried to take the moods and put them in colors, and then I had to figure out my band and what they look like on a stage. And that is exactly as well as I draw. Can you see that on there?
Yeah.
Wait. Okay. There we go.
Pretty good.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah,
Oh,
there
wow.
you go.
Oh,
See,
good.
Very
that's
good.
floral rates.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was trying to figure out how many of there are and where they stood on the stage, because there was a whole action scene that took place during a live concert where they'd be doing solos, but when the light's on somebody, the other two are taking off killing people, and then they come backstage. One of them is drilling a hole in the floor because they have to drop down to the basement. Well, I mean, it's basically G.I. Joe meets music.
Yeah.
And so I had to figure out what the logistics of that was. It's kind of funny. We are almost out of time. The next thing was gonna be, and something to think about, because all you guys are welcome back, and we can talk more about this. Who do you write stuff for? In other words, who do you imagine the audience being? If you're writing a kid thing, do you imagine a kid sitting in their living room? Do you imagine yourself as a kid, a specific kid or no kid at all? You just write for yourself.
Mm-hmm. I think I write for myself as a kid.
Yeah,
I think that's what I do.
Yeah.
I do too. I write for some version of myself.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think that's probably true.
But have you ever? But when you're writing a movie for a studio or something, you have a very specific target, and that is whoever the executive is, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Well.
And how much does that throw your mojo off? That you're not writing for yourself anymore; you're writing for your approximation. Usually, that's writing defensively.
Well, there's a rule that I've been following, or try to follow since I got married, and that was like, I was talking to Misty, and there were times where I would take an assignment that I just didn't feel like I had any link to or connection to, but it seemed like a good job, or it pays well, or it gets me involved with certain people. But then I would start writing it, and I'd feel like spinning my wheels. I just don't have any sort of emotional connection to this. And she would say, look, you have to give yourself the right to tell yourself it's either a hell yes or a hell no. And if you take you want to do something, hell yes, do it, and do it all the way. And if there's any doubt, because I don't want to put up with this shit with you sitting here till 3 a.m, spinning your wheels saying I can't write this, then it's a hell no, and you do not take the assignment. And just and I've tried to.
Well, wait, have you ever had a job you did for the money that went well?
No.
I can't remember that happening.
I haven't. Yeah, I was just going to say, good advice you got there. No, they never go well. Those jobs you do for the money.
Last year, I was doing an assignment. Like it began like 3 years ago. Somebody came to me and said, "We have this property, and you have some familiarity with the property, and I'd like to see you on this. Give a shot to this again." And I was thinking like. Something I had to brush with way back when, and and yet they were very enthusiastic about it. And then it took literally years for the rights to become available, and then I had sort of given a sort of yes, and then I took the assignment and I started writing it last year, and it was just it was not a good fit. And Misty kept saying hell yes or hell no, hell yes or hell no. This was a hell no, and you made it a hell yes, and now you've made life hell. So don't do this again. And the project sort of self-destructed, and I moved on. But but you always get these temptations, like maybe this time it'll be good, but you just have to listen to that little voice.
Maybe they'll never ask again. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I have a nearly magical ability that for a while I can get kind of interested in almost anything. I mean, there's a range, but I mean, I have a pretty wide range of weird interests. But then I'll develop, I call it a winky for a project. And a winky is like this thing I just love about the project. And sometimes it's something really specific. I'm trying to think of a really good example right now. It's an image, or it's a thing, or it's a story, it's something. And when that gets taken out by somebody, there's nothing left. You know what I mean? Somebody takes your winky away, and you just you can never quite, it's never yours again. You know what I mean? You never entirely relate to it. And I think we're all good enough brute force writers that we can kind of fake our way to a point through it, and sometimes get lucky.
Yeah, with me, I have trouble faking my way through it, and I do have to find the equivalent of winky and do my take on that property, and just do what I think is the right way to do it to fulfill the goals of the producer, but also to bring myself to it. And if I do that, then I can write the project. If I can't do that, nothing comes out. So I'm usually good enough about taking myself into a place where I do my version of it and I like it. And it either goes or doesn't go, but at least I feel like I've put myself into it.
Yeah, going hand in hand with the hell yes or hell no is, I have a rule: laugh or cry. When I write something, either it has to make me laugh or it has to make me cry. If it does neither, then it's not going to work for anybody else, and I start again. I abandon it or I start again. And then I figure out if I'm not laughing and if I'm not crying, I haven't figured out what's funny. And if I'm not crying, I'm not emotionally in sync with whatever the dramatic crux of this is. So start again.
Yeah. All right, we are at time now. I hope all you guys will come back. I mean, this is really this is fun. I mean, we talked about. I mean, the whole format is it's long, but last week I was trying to be real disciplined and keep everything on time. This is just wandering around because we didn't wander around. I'm not hearing about Bob Dylan crawling over Frank Zappa's fence. And it hit an aspect of the book that that I don't know that I did justice to it. But is just what a cool time that was, and all the stuff. It's kind of like every day was anything can happen day, and I don't feel like we're in that world. I mean, I don't feel like my kids live in that world. He's
no, it was like a time when you call me up. It's like, what's going on? I don't know. Meet me at Trader Vic's. All right. Then boom, rest of the night's at Trader Vic's, and we're talking.
Well, you remember the time you and Bruce Timm walked into Trader Vic's when Frank and I were sitting there, and you want a Batman intensive conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, that was like a Batman intensive conversation.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was a development meeting. They couldn't have paid for it, but yeah, we're sitting there drinking Navy grogs and talking about Batman, and you could still smoke cigars in Trader Vic's back then.
Yeah.
The world was a much more interesting place. All right, guys. So I hope you all come back, and thanks a lot.
All right. Hey, I'd like to thank everybody for being
care.
here today.
Good seeing you again, Ed.
Yep. And thank you in the audience for tuning in today. Be sure to pre-order your autographed copy of The Gamesmaster, Almost Famous in the Geek 80s, from the link in the stream description. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to give us a like and subscribe to the channel. If you have an idea for what you'd like to see in a future show, leave us a comment and we'll take a look. Stay tuned for more information on next week's stream. And again, thank you for watching Con to Couch. As we go, gentlemen, any projects you're promoting?
Yeah, good. That's what I was going to ask. Anybody got any projects you want to pitch or talk about?
Working on them, but not ready.
Yeah, same here.
I'll just repeat from last time. I have a story in an original crime anthology called Heartbreaks and Half Truths. That's coming out very, very soon, next week. So.
Oh, good.
Where do we find it?
It'll be online. You can find it online at Amazon. You can get it as either a Kindle or a hard copy.
Do we Google your name or what?
You just look up Tongor the Elephants.
Well,
the title of the anthology is Heartbreaks and Half Truths.
Yeah, okay, we'll get that link for next time, and we'll make sure that we've got that in the show description.
Yeah, let's just promote it. Yeah, put it in there in the promotions for next time. Just so people have it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I can't be the only self-aggrandizing person here. Everybody else got to do it.